What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected voices sits down with one of America's sharpest journalists to debate one of the most emotional topics of our time? This isn't about politics, movies, or awards. It's about family, dignity, and what it means to age with respect. Denzel Washington thought he was coming to Good Morning America to discuss his new charity initiative for seniors. But instead, he found himself in the middle of a heated debate about whether seniors are better off living with their families or independently. What happened next left the audience stunned, the internet buzzing, and Denzel delivering one of the most emotional live TV moments of his career.
The bright lights of the Good Morning America set shimmered across polished wood floors as cameras rolled, capturing the start of what was supposed to be a warm, inspiring segment. George Stephanopoulos, crisp in his navy suit, smiled toward the guest of honor. Beside him, Denzel Washington sat poised and relaxed, his signature calm charisma radiating across the stage. "Denzel," George began with a friendly tone, "you've been doing some remarkable work lately with senior living communities, and you've spoken passionately about aging with dignity. But today, we're tackling a question that sparked debates across America. Is it better for seniors to live with family or independently? Where do you stand on this?" Denzel leaned slightly forward, his hands clasped, voice smooth yet firm. "George, family is everything. When our parents and grandparents reach those later years, we need to be there. It's not just about a roof over their heads. It's about love, connection, and making sure they never feel abandoned. I've seen too many people left isolated in homes or facilities, and while some choose that path, far too many don't have a choice. We've got to do better." The studio audience hummed in agreement, a few claps breaking out. George nodded but quickly followed up, his journalist instinct kicking in. "That's a heartfelt point, Denzel, but statistics show an increasing number of seniors are choosing to live independently, even preferring it. Many say they value their privacy and autonomy. Are we wrong to respect that decision?" Denzel's expression softened. "I'm not saying seniors shouldn't have independence. Of course, if someone chooses to live alone and it makes them happy, that's beautiful. But too often what's framed as independence is really just loneliness. You know, back in the day, 3 generations would live under one roof. That was normal. You had grandma in the kitchen, grandpa telling stories on the porch, and kids learning wisdom right there in the home. We've lost that. Somewhere along the way, we started acting like elders are a burden instead of a blessing." The audience erupted in applause, clearly touched by his perspective. George, always composed, gently countered, "But Denzel, times have changed. Families today are busier, homes are smaller, and not everyone has the means to support another household member. Isn't independent living an answer to some of those practical realities?"
Denzel nodded, conceding the point slightly. "I get that. I'm not blind to reality. But when I hear too busy or no space, I hear a cultural shift that worries me. We make time and space for what we value. If we can find room for home offices, gyms, game rooms, why not make room for grandma? Why not rearrange our lives to support the very people who gave us life? It's not easy, but love isn't supposed to be easy." The studio audience clapped again, louder this time. One older man in the front row nodded vigorously, shouting, "That's right." George smiled slightly, sensing the emotional weight building early in the segment. "So you're saying family living isn't just a sentimental choice, it's a moral one?" Denzel leaned in, his voice lowering, almost intimate. "Exactly. It's about values. It's about saying to our elders, you matter enough to be with us, not away from us. We talk a lot about community and togetherness in this country, but when it comes down to our seniors, sometimes we don't walk the talk. And if we can't be there for them at the most vulnerable stage of life, what does that say about us as a society? The applause swelled again, and even George paused before responding, allowing the moment to breathe. The energy had shifted from polite conversation to something raw and deeply personal. George shifted slightly in his chair, his body language leaning forward now. The warm morning tone of Good Morning America had started to feel more like a primetime debate. George, I respect the passion you bring to this, and I think we all value family. But let's look at the other side of this conversation, George said, his voice tightening slightly. Independent living isn't neglect. For some seniors, it's liberation. It's having their own space, their own routine, without feeling like they're intruding or being treated like children again. The audience hummed in thought, some nodding, others clearly holding back comments. Denzel sat back for a moment, his hands clasped, eyes narrowing slightly in focus. I hear that, he replied, voice low but firm. But let's be honest, George. A lot of seniors don't choose to live alone because they want to. They do it because they feel like they have no place. Families are stretched thin, emotionally and financially. Some even make their elders feel like they're in the way. That's not independence. That's abandonment dressed up as choice. George quickly countered. But Denzel, seniors themselves say otherwise. AARP surveys show a majority prefer to live alone or in dedicated senior communities. They talk about freedom, having their own schedules, not worrying about being a burden. Denzel leaned forward now, his eyes locking on George's. And why do they feel like a burden in the first place? That's the cultural problem I'm talking about. Somewhere along the line, we started treating our elders like guests in their own families. They feel like if they speak up, if they need something, it's too much. That's heartbreaking to me. These are the people who worked 2 jobs to raise us, who sacrificed for us, who gave up their own dreams so we could chase ours. And now, when they need someone to lean on, we tell them, hey, enjoy your freedom over there. The audience clapped, some cheering loudly, while a few murmurs of disagreement rippled through. One middle-aged woman raised her hand slightly and shouted, Amen to that! George took a breath, smiling politely but clearly pressing back harder. But Denzel, isn't this also about dignity? Many seniors say living independently gives them pride. They don't have to depend on their kids or feel like they're under supervision. Some even say moving in with family brings stress or old conflicts back to life. You can't deny there are real benefits to autonomy. Denzel paused, letting the silence sit heavy for a moment before answering. You're right. Independence is dignity for those who truly choose it. I'm not saying every senior needs to move back in with family, but I am saying families need to make sure that choice is real, not forced by guilt, economics, or loneliness. You know what my mom told me once? She said, I don't need a big house, Denzel. I just need to know someone cares if I don't wake up in the morning. That's what family provides. Someone who cares. Someone who checks in. The audience erupted into applause again, some visibly emotional now. George nodded, but he wasn't finished. Fair point, but practically speaking, isn't this expecting too much from families who are already struggling, financially, emotionally, with kids of their own? Is it fair to put that pressure on them? Denzel's face softened, but his tone sharpened. Family isn't always easy, George. It's sacrifice. It's hard. But love, real love, is work. And I think somewhere along the way we decided convenience was more important than connection. We started outsourcing care to strangers because it was easier than rearranging our lives. And maybe that's what's breaking us, more than anything else. The audience erupted once again, some standing to clap, others wiping away tears. The tension on stage was now palpable, like an emotional storm building fast, pulling everyone in. The debate had grown thick with emotion, but nothing could have prepared the studio for what Denzel said next. He leaned back for a moment, took a breath, and his voice softened into something more personal. "George, let me tell you something about my grandmother," Denzel began, his eyes dropping briefly to the floor before looking back at George. "She raised 8 kids on her own after my grandfather passed. She worked 3 jobs and still found time to read bedtime stories to me and my siblings. She was the rock of our family." The audience fell silent. Even George, who had been poised for another counterpoint, leaned back and listened. "When she got older," Denzel continued, "we asked her what she wanted. Did she want her own space, a retirement community, something independent? You know what she said? She said, 'I want to hear kids laughing in the morning. I want to smell food cooking in the kitchen, even if I'm not the one cooking it anymore. I want to feel like I still belong to a family.'" And that hit me, man. Belonging. That's what we're talking about here. Not just a place to sleep, but a place to belong. A murmur of agreement swept through the audience, and a few people visibly dabbed their eyes. George cleared his throat. "That's a powerful story, Denzel. But, some people have the opposite experience. For them, living with family feels suffocating. Old conflicts, power struggles. They say independence gives them peace and even strengthens family relationships because they're not under the same roof every day." Denzel nodded slowly, acknowledging the point. "I hear that, and I'm not saying one size fits all. But too many seniors don't get a choice. They live alone not because they want to, but because they don't want to feel like a burden. That's the word I keep hearing, burden. And that's the word we have to erase. My grandmother didn't feel like a burden because we made sure she knew she was the glue, not the weight. That's the difference." He paused, his voice dropping even softer. "The last birthday we had with her, she was in her favorite chair, surrounded by kids and grandkids, singing, laughing, and she whispered to me, 'Thank you for letting me stay home. I don't feel alone.' Those were some of her last words to me." The audience was still now, hanging on every word. One woman in the crowd wiped tears from her eyes and whispered, "That's so beautiful." George adjusted his papers, but his usual composure faltered. That's touching, Denzel, and I see what you mean about belonging." Denzel leaned forward, his voice growing firmer again. "George, we have the resources in this country to build bigger houses, buy more cars, work longer hours. We can fly across the world at the drop of a hat. But somehow we can't figure out how to keep our elders close? That's a cultural problem, not a logistical one. Love is inconvenient. Family is inconvenient. But it's worth it." The audience broke into applause again, some people standing, cheering him on. Denzel looked down, visibly emotional himself, before glancing back at George with a faint, vulnerable smile. "I'm not saying independent living is wrong. I'm saying we need to stop pretending seniors want to be left out of family life when often they're just too proud to ask to stay. We need to give them the choice without guilt." The studio had gone from polite morning chatter to something heavier, almost electric. Every eye in the room was fixed on Denzel and George, waiting for what would come next. George shifted in his chair, straightening his notes, his voice taking on that trademark journalistic precision. "Denzel, I respect your story, but let's step outside personal experience for a moment. Many seniors say living alone isn't about being abandoned. It's about freedom. They can decorate their homes how they want, eat what they want, keep their own schedules, and avoid conflicts with their kids. Shouldn't we respect that as a valid choice? Maybe what looks like isolation to you is actually independence for them." Denzel didn't flinch, but there was a flicker of intensity in his eyes now. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and his voice carried a different weight, sharper but still steady. "You keep calling it independence, George, but I've visited these so-called independent living places. I've seen people sitting by themselves for days,
No kids, no grandkids, no visitors, just a television and four walls. That's not independence. That's loneliness in a nice building. The audience murmured. One man in the second row called out, "Preach!" George didn't back down. But what about seniors who actually want that space? Not everyone wants a busy house full of kids and noise. Some say that living alone helps them feel in control of their lives instead of dependent on family members who might be juggling work and their own children. Are we really saying their choice is wrong? Denzel sat up straight, his voice rising slightly, his composure still intact, but the passion unmistakable. I'm saying we need to ask ourselves why so many elders feel like their only choice is to be alone. Because if they feel unwelcome, if they feel like a burden, then that's not really a free choice. It's survival. And you know what, George? Love doesn't abandon people because it's inconvenient. That's not family. That's business. The audience erupted in loud applause, some people even standing up. An elderly woman in the front row shouted, "Tell it, Denzel!" George tried to bring the discussion back to logic, but even his voice softened slightly. "I'm not saying family isn't important, Denzel. I'm just saying we need to be careful about forcing proximity. Sometimes living apart makes family relationships healthier. Less conflict, less resentment, more quality time when they do come together."
Denzel looked at him, his eyes narrowing, but not in anger, in sadness. Healthy relationships don't come from distance, George. They come from communication, patience, love. I'd rather argue over what TV channel to watch than have a grandmother crying because no one came by for weeks. You call that healthy? That's avoidance, not love. The audience roared, clapping, whistling, some shouting amen and speak on it. Denzel turned slightly to face them, clearly moved by their reaction. "We talk about freedom and independence," he continued, gesturing toward the crowd. "But what kind of freedom is it if you're spending Christmas alone? If no one checks if you're okay? If you fall and nobody knows until the next day? Family is hard, but isolation? Isolation kills." A hush fell over the room as his words sank in. One older man stood up, tears in his eyes, and said loudly, "I live alone. He's right. It's lonely." The audience gasped softly, then applauded even louder. George exhaled and gave a small, almost reluctant nod. "Denzel, you're making a strong case. And it's clear this isn't just about policy. This is about something deeper, about values." Denzel leaned back finally, still emotional, but calmer. "It's about love, George. You don't outsource love. You don't put it on hold because it's inconvenient. Family is messy, yes. But you know what? So is life. And life's better when you're together." The audience rose to their feet, applauding so loudly that the director had to motion for the applause to calm so they could cut to commercial. Denzel sat back, his hand briefly covering his eyes, clearly holding back emotion. When the show returned from commercial, the energy in the room was entirely different. The debate had evolved beyond statistics and policies. It had become something raw and deeply human. George, usually composed and razor-sharp, leaned forward slightly, his voice softer now. "Denzel, I have to admit, I came into this conversation thinking about this purely from a modern lifestyle perspective. Independence, autonomy, practicality. But you've made me stop and think about something bigger. Belonging. And I think our viewers are feeling that too." Denzel smiled faintly, nodding. "George, I'm not saying every senior has to live with family. I'm saying they should feel wanted. Whether they choose to live with loved ones or on their own, it shouldn't be because they think they're a burden. It should be because it's what makes them happy and safe. We've got to start talking to our elders, not just about them." The audience clapped softly at first, then louder, as though the collective emotion in the room couldn't be contained. An elderly woman in the front row wiped tears from her eyes, and a young man behind her put an arm around her shoulder. George turned toward the cameras, visibly moved. "Maybe that's the real takeaway here. Families are complicated, life is complicated, but conversations like this, they matter. They remind us that we're all connected, across generations. Denzel leaned toward the audience, his voice steady but thick with emotion. Call your parents. Call your grandparents. If they live alone, visit them. If they live with you, thank them for being part of your life. Don't wait for a holiday. Don't wait for regret to make you realize what you had. Love people now while they can feel it. The studio audience rose to their feet, applauding, some openly crying. Even George stood, reaching across the table to shake Denzel's hand. "That's powerful, Denzel. Thank you for sharing that today," he said sincerely. Denzel smiled, nodding once more, before adding one final thought. "We talk about building a better future all the time, but we can't do that if we forget the people who built our past. They're not just part of our story, they are our story." The applause thundered again as the camera panned across the audience, capturing tears, hugs, and knowing glances between strangers who suddenly felt like family. As the credits rolled, the segment was already trending online. Clips of Denzel's heartfelt story spreading with captions like, "A wake-up call for America," and "Denzel Washington just changed the conversation on elder care." What did you think of Denzel's emotional stand? Did it change how you see family and aging? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if you want more powerful celebrity moments like this, hit subscribe, turn on the bell so you never miss a clash like this one, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Because these conversations, they're bigger than TV. They're about us all.